Hello and welcome back to another episode of Biblical Unlocks. We're going to be talking about revenge today and how David has another opportunity to settle the score with Saul and to end the terror that he's experiencing. But it's interesting because he chooses mercy again, and that's what we're going to see in 1 Samuel chapter 26. We're going to see how the Ziphites are going to betray. Saul sleeps with his spear beside him, and David refuses a second time to kill the Lord's anointed one. And we're going to see how repeated mercy, again, shows your heart more deeply than retaliation could ever show it. And I'll give you one immediate action to help you stay true to mercy, even when you want to get revenge. In this episode of Biblical Unlocks, this show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get a little bit of context into the chapter. So, 1 Samuel chapter 26 is the second time we see David and Saul, and David has the power to kill Saul. He has the opportunity to kill Saul, but he doesn't. So at the beginning of the chapter, we're going to see the Ziphites betray David again. Saul comes down into the wilderness with his army, and David sneaks into the camp at night with Abishai. And what's interesting is Saul's spear and his water jug are beside him, but David does not strike. Instead, he takes the spear and jug as evidence, and he confronts Saul later. And he declares that the Lord himself will judge between them. Again, the same thing that we saw in 1 Samuel chapter 24. So we had a one chapter break, and we're back with David having another opportunity to kill Saul, and yet he doesn't. And Saul admits his sin, he blesses David, and the chapter ends with David still in exile, but he's morally vindicated again. So it's about showing mercy again, repeatedly, right? This was another opportunity for him, and he should have said, I spared him the last time, maybe I could do it this time. But there's a power in choosing mercy over becoming an avenger. Okay, so let's read verses 1 to 12. The focus here is going to be on the Ziphites betraying David. Saul comes hunting again, and David entering the camp and refusing to kill Saul. Verse 1. Then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, David is in hiding on the hill of Hachilah, which is opposite Jeshimon. So Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, with 3,000 chosen men of Israel to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. Saul encamped on the hill of Hachilah, which is opposite Jeshimon, beside the road. But David remained in the wilderness. When he heard that Saul had come after him into the wilderness, David sent out spies and learnt that Saul had indeed arrived. Then David set out and came to the place where Saul had encamped, and David saw the place where Saul lay. With Abner son of Ner, the commander of his army, Saul was lying within the encampment, while the army was encamped around him. Then David said to Ahimelech the Hittite, and to Joab's brother Abishai son of Zeruiah, Who will go down with me into the camp to Saul? Abishai said, I will go down with you. So David and Abishai went to the army by night. There Saul lay, sleeping within the encampment, with his spear stuck in the ground at his head, and Abner and the army lay around him. Abishai said to David, God has given your enemy into your hand today. Now therefore, let me pin him to the ground with one stroke of the spear. I will not strike him twice. But David said to Abishai, Do not destroy him, for who can raise his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? David said, As the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him down, or his day will come to die, or he will go down into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should raise my hand against the Lord's anointed. But now take the spear that is at his head and the water jar, and let us go. So David took the spear that was at Saul's head and the water jar, and they went away. No one saw it or knew it, nor did anyone awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them. Okay, so what do we read at the beginning of this chapter? First thing is we see the Ziphites betray David right at the beginning. So, again, the reason why they betray is because, well, they already betrayed him. I just want to point that out. They're helping Saul again. And the reason why is because there are going to be people in your life who are going to collaborate with evildoers, okay? They're going to collaborate against you. There are going to be forces outside your will. And you could say, well, why doesn't God just remove all of the enemies of David? No, there's a lesson here that needs to be taught, and that is that David needs to learn to rely on God, and he's passing the test that we are seeing. And Saul is still hunting David after all this time because, again, what's deep in the posture of his heart is that he's driven by suspicion, he's driven by envy, and David just existing is a threat to him. So we see that corruption of the internal posture of the heart. That is why he feels as though he needs to kill David, but he won't be satisfied, right? He's killed so many people because of this one person. And we see that David enters the camp, but yet he refuses to kill Saul. And he has a second opportunity to kill Saul, but he doesn't. Because now in 1 Samuel chapter 24, what we saw in the cave was a mere accident, right? But this time, David actually deliberately goes into the camp. He and Abishai, they both move right into the camp, and yet David refuses to stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed one. And it's so interesting because the second time you could feel like you can feel it, like the temptation is even more, it feels more reasonable now, right? Oh, I let him loose the first time. This time I can actually do the deed. But and even Abishai says, this is a God-given opportunity, David, to kill Saul. Saul is asleep with the spears right there. The guard is down. And all of this makes sense in our human understanding. But David refuses. And it's interesting because sometimes some opportunities are temptations in disguise. And David refuses. And it's interesting again. He refuses to kill Saul because he calls Saul the Lord's anointed. Saul has tried to kill him innumerable times. Saul is wrong, but he still belongs to the Lord's judgment. And he says, let the Lord judge between me and him. That is the most important thing that we see. As the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him down. He entrusts full judgment to the Lord. Okay, let's read verses 13 to 20. The focus here is going to be David confronting Abner and the sleeping camp, and then David's going to call to Saul across the valley. Let's read. Verse 13. Then David went over to the other side and stood on the top of a hill far away, with a great distance between them. David called to the army and to Abner, son of Ner, saying, Abner, will you not answer? And then Abner replied, Who are you who calls to the king? David said to Abner, Are you not a man? Who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not kept watch over your lord the king? For one of the people came in to destroy your lord the king. This thing that you have done is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die because you have not kept watch over your Lord, the Lord's anointed. See now, where is the king's spear or the water jar that was at his head? Verse 17. Saul recognized David's voice and said, Is this your voice, my son David? David said, It is my voice, my lord, O king. And he added, Why does my lord pursue his servant? For what have I done? What guilt is on my hands? Now therefore, let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If it is the Lord who has stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if it is mortals, may they be cursed before the Lord. For they have driven me out today from my share in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, Go serve other gods. Now therefore, do not let my blood fall to the ground away from the presence of the Lord. For the king of Israel has come out to seek a single flea, like one who hunts a partridge in the mountains. Okay, so 1 Samuel chapter 25, we move from verses 13 to 20. What do we see? David first confronts Abner, and he took the spear and the water jug that were besides Saul's head as like evidence of what he could have done, right? So the spear is Saul's symbol of threat, and the water jug it represents life and vulnerability. And what we see here is that Saul was very exposed, right? This was a golden opportunity, as Abishai was pointing out very rightly before. But that's from his human perspective. David could have killed him, and he takes the proof to show something, to make a point. And what exactly is that point? The point is that Abner is the chief protector, and he's failed in his duty, and David makes sure he understands this. And the scene, this particular scene matters so much. It's to show something, that he was close enough to kill. He's trying to make it very clear. He was close enough to kill, but he didn't. And what we see later on is that David speaks from a distance across the valley. And the reason why he speaks at such a distance is because he wants to, we're emphasizing the amount of separation between these two. Okay, David is not trying to seize Saul. He wants him to hear, right? He's addressing Saul as a king. He respects him, whilst also showing how absurd it is like a partridge in the mountains is what we read, to try and attack and go after David. And it's interesting because he says his life is being driven away from the Lord's inheritance, and he appeals to the Lord again because he's being persecuted. This is having a spiritual cost because he's being expelled from the covenant space. He's going into places where they worship other gods, and the anointed one is being cut off from his own inheritance. All right, so now let's read verses 21 to 25. Here we're going to see Saul confesses again and blesses David again. And my question to you is, how can Saul say the right thing and still not be transformed? Verse 21. Then Saul said, I have done wrong. Come back, my son David, for I will never harm you again, because my life was precious in your sight today. I have been a fool and have made a great mistake. David replied, Here is the spear, O king. Let one of the young men come over and get it. The Lord rewards everyone for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord gave you into my hand today, but I would not raise my hand against the Lord's anointed. As your life was precious today in my sight, so may my life be precious in the sight of the Lord, and may he rescue me from all tribulation. And then Saul said to David, Blessed be you, my son David. You will do many things and will succeed in them. So David went his way, and Saul returned to his place. Quite a beautiful ending we can see right at the end of this chapter. The deepest message, I think, is that we see David's heart more clearly through his mercy, right? He could have killed Saul, but that's not who David is. David is a man after God's heart, and he refuses to hurt the Lord's anointed one, even though he is well within his rights to do so, in the sense that he is justified, right? He's justified in acting in this way. And the reason why is because Saul has been maliciously persecuting him. But Saul sounds sincere in this particular instance because for a moment he is. He says, I have sinned. He blesses David, and he even admits that David is surely going to succeed. But is this lasting change? And it's interesting because Saul asks David to come back, but David doesn't come back to Saul because David knows deep down that Saul's heart is quite unstable. And he knows that he relies on God to judge between them fully. And he continues to live by the principle that the Lord will repay every man according to his righteousness and his faithfulness. And David has mercy. He's not passive. I think the biggest misconception we can get from this chapter is perhaps that, well, not from this chapter clears up the misconception, but we get the idea, well, if he's not seeking revenge, if he's not getting back, then he sort of is just allowing it. He's just letting it happen. No. Having mercy is a radical form of trust in God, a radical form of trust, and he is the one who's ultimately going to succeed. Having mercy. You could get back at your enemies, but you can also throw down the burning coal that you're holding, because if you're trying to throw a burning coal at someone, the only person who's going to get burnt is yourself. So disarm yourself and let God be the ultimate judge. Let's see how this chapter fulfills Jesus Christ. Okay, so 1 Samuel chapter 26 is the second time David refuses to kill Saul, and the second time mercy exposes the moral bankruptcy of revenge. And through Jesus Christ we see that Jesus repeatedly refuses to seize power by violence, and he finally hands himself over instead of taking vengeance. And David's repeated restraint points towards the future King of Kings, whose kingdom was to be established not by killing his enemies, but by loving them so much that he was willing to die for them. He bears judgment for them. That's why we read in Romans chapter 12, verse 21, Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. We should show that mercy. If God has spared you, do not become what he spared you from. Okay, so how can we apply this chapter in our everyday lives? I think the most important thing is we need to stay consistent to our beliefs. Saul was lying there, and David had another opportunity to kill him, but he didn't. He said, I am not going to kill the Lord's anointed one. There are going to be situations, especially where it seems right for you to do something, right in your own eyes, if you will. But if someone has wronged you, you can speak truth without escalating the harm, and you can leave judgment with God. Again, we have many instances, right, where you'll see people are just taking advantage of you, people who have wronged you in innumerable ways, in distressing and hurtful ways. But the problem with taking revenge is you're no better than them. All you need to do is leave it to God. It can be difficult, right? There may be a recurring conflict where you're tempted to finally, like, you want to respond harshly, you want to set the record straight, but disarm yourself and have a heart like David and heart like God, and you'll see true peace. You're not going to let things affect you because you're leaving it all up to God. My God knows what I go through, and I leave it to Him. Alright, so we saw in this chapter that the Ziphites betray David once again. And we see how fear repeated itself right at the beginning of the chapter. David has a second chance of revenge. He could kill Saul right at this very moment, but he instead chooses mercy instead of murder. And Saul confesses and leaves the chapter. At the end, it seems like there's a resolution to this, but we know that this is not going to last very long. So, next time we're going to move from David's second form of mercy to his dark season among the Philistines in 1 Samuel chapter 27. We're going to unpack Ziklag, survival, and what happens when faith is tested by long waiting. You don't want to miss it. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate the show and follow. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.